Fish and Filtered, episode 62. My name is Kevin Barral. I'm here with my co-host Isaac Azout and good friend, and we have a very special guest today. We have Alex Krutchik, our own staffer. He's joining us because you two were at the Peter Bendix press conference that took place earlier today. We're recording this on Tuesday, just as the Detroit Tigers and that Houston Astro game is wrapping up, and I believe a couple other games are starting up now. So, Isaac, what's up? Season's over. A lot to talk about. Skip is gone. We could talk a little bit about some candidates that could potentially replace him. Maybe an update soon on the coaching staff, and then what's to come with this offseason. Honestly, it's a very crucial one for Peter Bendix.
Yes, it is following his first full season as the head of baseball operations. Hi, Kevin. How are you? Glad you consider me a good friend. Alex, like you said, Alex Krutchik and I were both at the end of season press conference held by Peter Bendix. Bruce Sherman was not available, which I did ask about, and I did ask if it's the norm for most majority owners to be available. Apparently it's not, so I don't put too much weight into that. But yeah, we have a lot to dive into. We have Skip Schumaker, obviously him and the Marlins mutually parting ways. We have a whole off season to try and predict what may or may not happen. And like you said, we're going to get into some managerial candidates and probably review the whole 2024 forgetful season and just talk about what went right, what went wrong, and everything else.
Probably the last time we'll be talking about the 2024 season on here, honestly, and I wouldn't hate not going back to it. So, but another good friend and our staffer here, Krutchik, what's up? You were there at Peter Bendix's press conference, and we'll let you kick it off, man. I know it was a whole lot of nothing, honestly. Let's be fair. A lot of conversations were had. Some were had, some were not had, and some were private. So just take us through what Peter Bendix said on Tuesday morning.
Yeah, you really said it there. There's three categories of conversations with Peter Bendix. The ones that they've had, the ones that they will have, and the ones that are being kept private. Every single question that we asked fell into one of those categories that we tried, man. Like, people want us to ask the hard questions. Let me tell you, as someone who was in the room, we all asked hard questions. Me, Isaac, MLB.com, Miami Herald. Like, we all asked hard questions. Oh, Alex Shabase. All of us asked hard questions. Some of us asked the same hard question twice, even three times. There was one question that was asked three times. And he's just a very closed book. Doesn't tell you anything at all. And it's by design. I'm sure Peter Bendix is not this boring of a person in his personal life, but by design, he doesn't want to tell us anything. And I understand why, but it's still frustrating just going to these press conferences and feeling just as out of the loop leaving it as I was going into it.
If you want to follow up with that, Isaac.
Yeah, that was perfectly said, Krutchik. That was awesome. I try and remember previous GMs or head of baseball operations, Kim Ng, Michael Hill, Larry Beinfeld, all these people, and also executives of other teams. They do keep things close to vest. There is reason to not share things with the media at certain times. However, to me, I just feel like they did a much better job of saying more without saying something. Peter Bendix kept his answers brief, and he didn't say anything. Michael Hill, Kim Ng, they would at least they would elaborate on things. They would be articulate, and they'd be respectful with their answers. Not that Peter Bendix wasn't respectful, but it just felt like we didn't come out of there thinking, wow, this was a little bit of a waste of time. But yeah, we did ask. Obviously, the main storyline to ask today was Skip Schumaker, 2023 Manager of the Year. This was someone who the entire roster, any player that did put on a Marlins jersey over the last 2 years, which there was a lot, but any Marlins player had nothing but kind words to say about Skip. And, if you ask me, if you have people that work for you or below you, in which case the players are for Skip, there's no bigger flex than that. You had everyone speaking so highly of Skip. So the fair question was, hey, what the heck is going on? Why didn't you guys put the effort in bringing him back? Like Alex said, it was asked 3 times. I was one of them.
Spring training, you had mentioned that you and Skip were aligned on pretty much everything that was important. He had mentioned you'd like to manage beyond 2024. Why weren't you able to come through with a deal?
Like I said, we had a lot of conversations throughout the year, a lot of conversations at the end of the year. Those are private conversations, and I'm going to keep.
Yeah, I don't think there's much more to say on that. Definitely frustrating going into those kinds of press conferences. We've had them in spring training. Even the first time he ever spoke, which I believe was around this time, honestly, maybe a little bit towards the later months of the offseason, maybe a month after the season ended. Same stuff, with the conversations and And I think the first time we're actually talking about this on the podcast, so I'm glad we're bringing this up. But yeah, definitely very, very frustrating to see. Really getting non-answers, and to a certain extent, Crutcher kind of mentioned it. You kind of feel like your time to a certain extent was kind of wasted. Just going in there and leaving, and then just having the same opinion that you had going into this press conference. Usually you feel like you would feel a little bit better about the team. Maybe you'd feel like you agree with some things, maybe you don't. But with Peter, definitely it's been a little frustrating. But hey, man, we hope he makes the right moves at the end of the day. I mean, whatever he says to the media is whatever he says. But at the end of the day, what matters is the moves that he makes in the offseason, and hopefully he hits the head on this managerial hiring. So let's go into that. Skip Schumacher out as Marlins manager. We kind of had a inkling of that, at the start of the season. Skip's option was removed. He asked for it to be removed, if I'm correct, and it was. And Isaac, I'll let you talk about this, but Skip, I mean, it goes without saying, great human. He was great with us. He came on the podcast multiple times, and I mean, he really wasn't on too many other podcasts, if I had to say, at least amongst the Miami media. So definitely shows what he thought of our outlet and what he thinks of us, and he supports what we did. And he was a great manager. Won it in 2023. Took the Marlins back to the playoffs for the first time in a full season since 2003. I don't think there are better things that could be said about Skip, but will not be back. I'm sure that if he is planning to manage in 2025, he will be the top candidate for many teams.
Yeah, well said, Kevin. He was a Kim Ng hire. This was a divided hire, from what I understand. It was Kim Ng and a few others versus the other side of the room, and they eventually decided. Obviously, it was Kim's decision at the end of the day. They went with Skip Schumacher, and if you ask me, that was one of the better decisions that administration ever made. I think Skip Schumacher. Without Skip, I don't think the Marlins make the postseason in 2023. There was even an article that we put out there when they came back to beat the Cardinals, and it was called another instance of shoe magic. He just was really a fantastic hire for this team. Obviously, 2024 did not go the way we thought. And in fact, Kevin, when one of his podcast appearances on our show, we actually had to delay it because of the Kim Ng.
His first time. It would have been his first time. Yeah,
his first time had to be delayed because he told me, Isaac, you'll see why, but I can't go on tomorrow. And he did come back on eventually a couple more times after that. But once that happened, you just weren't really surprised that 2024 went the way it did. But you wouldn't be able to tell if you looked at Skip the way he was managing this team day in, day out, whether it was April 1st or whether it was September 15th. You did not know that Miami was 50 games under 500. The way he managed was second to none. And we shall see. I would give it a 50-50 shot that he manages in 2025. The opportunity has to be perfect for him, from what I understand.
Yeah, obviously his son is going out of TCU. I believe his daughter's starting high school, so definitely wants to be there for those occasions. So I totally get it. Crutchick, talk a little bit about Skip. Just the decision making that he had. I mean, Isaac kind of mentioned that maybe they wouldn't have made the playoffs if it wasn't for him. And we look at towards the end of the season, we knew this was bound to happen at some point. And I know, Isaac, you had even mentioned, I think somewhere else, that maybe he wasn't even going to make it for the whole season, but he somehow did. And they were playing to win every single game. And it was, I mean, you look at this last stretch and this final road trip, it was some of the best baseball I think we've seen from this team in a pretty long time, Crutchick.
Yeah, no one wants to hear this after a 100-loss season, but the fact that no one ever seemed to really quit on this team, the fact that they played until the very end, if anything, they got better towards the end. It was very weird to see. It really shows how much they loved Skip, and the fact that this team was so bad, not that anyone thought that it was Skip's fault that 5 pitchers got injured and the offense was already not great to begin with, but still, no one pointed fingers, no one blamed Skip within the clubhouse, at least not that I know of. The fact that even after 100 losses, they still rallied around Skip, especially that last weekend of the season in Toronto, it really speaks to how well he kept that clubhouse together. And that's a hard thing to do when not only are you bad, but you were bad early on. They were bad for the entire 6 months. Being bad for 6 months every day, too. Baseball's an everyday sport. They were bad every day for 6 months, and somehow they still played their hardest. As far as I know, there was no inter-clubhouse strife. It was just a real testament to how good Skip is at this.
Yeah, and I guess with that being said, we could also quickly touch on his coaching staff, which at the moment has not been let go. Nothing's happened yet. Obviously, I think you asked him, Krutchik, about the coaching staff, and Peter Bendix did mention that he will have a conversation with them this week at some point. So we'll see when that happens. And but I think we could all assume for the most part, not many of these guys will be back. And I think the big name is Mel. We'll see what happens with him. He has 1 year left on his deal. Isaac, Mel went from having one of the worst pitching staffs in baseball when he joined the Marlins in, I think, 2019 to now having the second best bullpen at the end of this season. He had, I believe, a top 10 pitching rotation last year. We won't go into this year, obviously, just because of the injuries, but he was certainly the truth, you could say, to a certain extent with some of these guys. And he made some guys look really good. You think of Sandy in 2019, then 2022, obviously, Pablo in 2020, Trevor in 21. And then last year, you look at Luzardo and Brax. What they did was impressive.
Yeah, you mentioned all the heroics really that Mel did. The example that I think of first is Trevor Richards, just developing that changeup and make him an average major league pitcher, or above average at times, for as long as he did. There's no surprise that I do. It was surprising, in my opinion, that once Donnie left, that he stayed on board with a Skip staff. But unfortunately, from what I'm hearing, I find it highly unlikely that Mel and many of the guys that you see on that screen right now will return. The only guy that I can maybe see possibly staying is Brandon Mann, the pitching strategist. Sorry, but
well,
no,
that was a Bendix hire too. So
right. So with Mel, unfortunately, like you mentioned, it was a great 5 years with Miami. He really turned Sandy Alcantara into that Cy Young Award winner, I think, because he was walking 4 or 5 guys per 9 innings in 2019. 2020 was a tough year for everyone, but he really helped that pitching staff in an immense way. So it's going to be a tough one. But from what I've heard, it seemed like he was a little bit behind when it came to sort of the analytics stuff that the Marlins wanted to do this year. Even I think even going back to last year as well, there were some coaches and some guys in the organization that wanted to move on from some of Mel's thoughts or whatever. But it seems like his time had come to an end pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of think of it. Mel's been around the game for a very, very long time, and he's one of those guys who kind of was introduced to those analytics. Skip is a younger guy who, and honestly, a lot of this coaching staff is fairly young for the most part. So it does make sense that Mel kind of, to a certain extent, was a little bit behind on this stuff and wanted to kind of keep those old antics, which, to his credit, they were working. I mean, look what he did with some of these guys. So
yeah,
look at it from
I was
both
very
sides.
surprised. I was very surprised to hear that. I was arguing, saying, "Look at what he's done with all these pitchers," and yet all the wordage was that it was meh regarding Mel Stoudemire Jr. I would have to ask more about that.
Krutchik, let's take a look at the rest of the staff. At the moment, it looks like hopefully some of them do stay. I mean, we hope, just given you don't want to ever see someone lose a job, but a lot of these guys are Skip guys and most likely will all be gone. We don't have to go through each one, but some of the ones that obviously stand out, like Pipe, Luis Urueta, and John Jay, even Jody Reed, who made the move to infield coach this season. Just talk about some of the guys. I know John Jay would have made sense to stay. He's a Miami guy, played at UM for a couple of years. The players really like John Jay. They think very highly of him. Same thing goes with Pipe. I mean, John Jay even had managerial interest from the Mets, I believe, last year. So I wouldn't have even been shocked if he were to have been given some sort of interview by the Marlins, at least Cortis, just you do the right thing, give him at least a shot to interview for the job. But talk about some of these guys on the coaching staff.
Yeah, John Jay was actually the guy that I was going to touch on there because, like you said, he's had managerial interest. He's on the team. He provides continuity. One thing that I was worried about was, the players loved Skip, and to take someone like that away from the team, that's going to be a huge hit to the morale. And you could get a guy who isn't Skip, but is a guy that's still been here for the last 2 years. He's similar to Skip, and it's a familiar face. And like you said, he's from Miami. He's Cuban-American. He played at the University of Miami. It would have been a fun story. It would have been a fun story if he was hired as the manager. I think he has it in him. John Jay, out of all the guys on the staff, were one of the ones that I wanted to see not only stay, but also get looked at as a manager.
And then the other guy we should talk about, which our good friend Eli is suggesting, is Austin Lanke, who was a stud last year in 23. I'm not exactly sure how the Marlins did in reviews this past season, but I don't think it was to the same status as what we saw in 23. Isaac, I'll let you talk a little bit about Austin. We actually interviewed him in that playoff season. He's a really cool guy, and he's a big behind-the-scenes guy, which you don't really hear his name too much, but certainly did the job very well for these past 2 seasons.
Yeah, he's been around doing this for a pretty long time. He was with the Marlins in the minor league part of it. He was the minor league video coordinator since 2019, and then in 2022 he became the major league video coordinator. And you're right, 2023 was this year that he was just like hitting
He was on the
home
money.
runs. He was hitting home runs every single time that Pipe put the hands on his ears and they wanted a challenge. He got almost every single one right. I'm with you, Kevin. 2024, I don't think it was as successful. He was as successful, but he's someone else. I don't necessarily see Peter
There he
Bennett
is.
looking to replace. There's Skip Pipe. Oh, Pipe looks like he had a few too many there. But yeah, Austin that's gonna be a very interesting one. I'm glad Eli brought that up because I have no insight whatsoever on whether or not the Marlins would like to keep him. But from what's been reported, what I've heard, what Andy Slater reported earlier this afternoon, that they are going from clubhouse attendants to trainers to coaching staff. A lot of people have started to get let go, and that started today on October 1st, the first day of the Major League postseason. So I wouldn't be surprised if Austin Lamke, unfortunately, was one of those victims.
Yeah, it needs to be noted. Andy Slater did report that there have been already some firings that we don't know exactly who they are, but I think we should be finding that out either, honestly, maybe in the middle of this podcast or even a day after we record. So we'll see. We'll obviously check out fishonfirst.com. You'll be able to check out all the firings, all the movement and everything over there. But let's talk potential candidates to replace Skip. I think it's a little bit too early to talk about it, but we more or less have some sort of idea where they could go. I think, obviously when Peter was asked what he's looking for, he really didn't give a specific answer. But Isaac, just who stands out to you as a potential managerial option right now? I know the Paul Hoover, who is the Kansas City Royals bench coach, would make a lot of sense. Former Ray, played for the Marlins actually for about a year. He didn't play too much, but it's like one of those names that you remember just because of the I guess the name just sticks to you and does, and he would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's definitely a name to look out for. Former Rays guys. I'll tell you one name that will not be in consideration, who was a very popular one, is assistant GM Gabe Kapler. I've heard from multiple reputable people that he is going to stick. Most likely he's going to stick with his front office role. I believe that he and Rachel Balkovich are going to be running the entire minor league department going forward. So I think it's confirmed that they're most likely going to stay. It was obviously Rachel will, but Gabe Kapler is most likely going to stay in an executive position. And then the one name that I have heard rumblings about was Craig Albernaz, the bench coach of the Cleveland Guardians. He overlapped with Gabe Kapler, I think it was, with the Giants when he was their bullpen and catching coach. And he's a name. He's obviously, like I said, he's currently the bench coach for the postseason Cleveland Guardians. It is possible for some of these active coaches to interview while their team is in the postseason. We saw when Skip was hired, a few of I forget which one was in the middle of a postseason race, but
I think with Skip, he had gotten eliminated, and that's when they contacted him. I think you're referring to Joe Espada, who was in there for a little bit longer, who did interview.
It was him, right? Not Skip, but there are other coaches that are the team has to give permission, obviously, of course, to be interviewed for these managerial positions. And I do believe that Craig Albernaz is definitely someone that will be interviewed at some point.
Krawczyk, anyone else who kind of stands out to you a little bit?
I've heard the name Dusty Wathan. One of the coaches for the Philadelphia Phillies. What exactly is he? He's a third base coach. I forgot which base it was, but I do know that he has a connection with Gabe Kapler. He was also a base coach on Gabe Kapler's staff back in 2018, I believe 2019. He has spent a lot of time in the minor leagues as well. So if Bendix is looking for someone to deal with, prospects coming up and younger guys that need developing, that's a guy that could be there. Also, I just always love seeing a guy who that was quick. I just love seeing a guy who used to be a catcher. I feel like guys that were catchers in their professional career or middle infielders like Skip Schumacher was, I feel like that's I feel like that's always a nice little fit as manager. So I think that's the kind of guy that I would look at on a short list.
Dustin's been there for a minute too. He was with Kapler, and now he's with their new guy, Rob Thompson. So he's been there for a very, very long time. The other name I would look at personally is from the Tampa Bay Rays coaching staff, Ronnie Linares, who is very familiar with Sandy Alcantara. He was the Dominican Republic's manager in this past WBC. He's obviously someone who Peter Bendix is very, very familiar with. Wouldn't be shocked if he at least interviews for the job. I think he's more of a players coach type guy, which I think a lot of people would like that, and he's in there with the analytics, so it would make a lot of sense. All right, so let's move on. I think we should just recap the season. We're kind of coming to the end of the pod, so definitely not what anyone was expecting going into the year. I mean, you had a pretty good pitching staff for the most part with Jesus Luzardo, Braxton Garrett, Ryan Weathers, AJ Puck was in there at one point. And I believe Edward Cabrera. That ended up turning into a combination of Valente Bellozo, Darren McCacken, Adam Aller. Who else? Jeez, I mean, it was a lot of, no offense, no-name players that I really hadn't heard of. Roderick Munoz.
Yeah, you're forgetting Munoz.
Yeah, I think at one point Roderick was your number 3.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sean Anderson was getting some starts.
Yeah, Sean Anderson. Ken Emanuel, I think, got a start in there too. So
Trevor Rogers, who hasn't been on the team since late July, led in innings pitched. And then after that, your workhorse was Edward Cabrera. That's your guy.
Yes.
Yeah, so Crutchick, talk to us a little bit about the season, man. We went with decently high hopes, honestly. I think we all predicted over 65 wins, I want to say. And we felt pretty good, man. Tim Anderson, we thought he was going to bounce back. He was going to be pretty good. We thought Nick Gordon was going to be a nice little acquisition. We thought Avi maybe potentially bounces back a little bit. We thought Sixto would be back as a pretty decent reliever. And well, we look now on October 1st, and they're all gone. So take us through the season.
Yeah. God, yeah, I could say so many things to that list of guys that you just said, but I'm going to choose not to. I'll put it to you this way. Let me pick a random player here. Valente Bellozo was the 5th most valuable player on this team. And look, I like Valente Bellozo. He's a great guy. He's also a solid pitcher. He should not have been your 5th most valuable player. Now, part of that is because of how much he played. It is a cumulative stat. I would say the same thing with, let's see. Who is that? Jesus Tinoco. Jesus Tinoco is your 7th most valuable player. Again, fantastic pitcher. Like, kudos to Peter Bendix for finding that guy, and kudos to Tinoco for performing higher than our expectations. He's your 7th most valuable player this year. That kind of tells you how much roster turnover there was, how many injuries there were, how many waiver claims there were. They used, what was the final number? Was it 71, 72 players this year? It was a record.
I think it was like 71. 70.
Dude, keeping up with the transaction list this year was the biggest challenge of the season. It was harder than like writing the actual stories, just keeping up with the transaction every day. That's really what this whole season was about. Like, wherever Skip winds up next, I think what he's going to be most excited about, I don't want to speak for Skip, but if I was Skip, I would think the thing I would be most excited about is just knowing who your guys are every day. Like, that seems like it'll be so relaxing for him. But in all seriousness, I do like what we saw in the second half from some of the guys on offense. I really liked what I saw in Connor Norby. I liked what we saw from Xavier Edwards. I liked the flashes of offense that we saw from Otto Lopez. I loved the defense that we saw from him. It's nice that you can look at the guys in the second half and pinpoint who should be on the opening day roster last year. Because if we're being honest, like when the trade deadline was approaching and I heard of all the players that were going to get traded away, I was thinking to myself, they're going to be left with nobody, and I have no idea who's going to be on the opening day or in the opening day lineup next year because we're about to get a whole bunch of nobodies on this team, and I wound up being wrong. There's guys that will play next year, and I think that they will play well next year. We'll just have to see how well they play and how much of this year's production carries over into next year.
And this is going to be a pretty exciting spring training just because of the amount of prospects that they brought in. I mean, Davison De Los Santos, Augustin Ramirez, Jared Serna. I don't think he'll crack the roster, but he'll definitely make a case, I think. And there's going to be guys on there that were on this roster just now that are going to be fighting for a position, like a Griffin Kona, and could even mention a Cal Stowers who needs to fight for a position on there. So let's go a couple players just to highlight. I mean, I think the first one we need to mention is Jake Berger. I believe he was just one shy of that 30th home run, but still, I mean, he had ups and downs, but that second half of the season certainly looked a lot more like the Jake Berger we saw when he was traded over to Miami, and he looked pretty freaking good, and he's going to be someone who's going to be on this team at least for a couple more years. We'll see what happens with the I think it's the Super 2 that Eli had been mentioning, so we'll see what happens there. But Isaac, talk to us a little bit about Jake Berger, the quote-unquote veteran of this team, although he's been in Major League Baseball for not very long.
Yeah, the clubhouse leader of this Marlins team, no doubt about it. He was someone that took the Skip news very difficult. If you haven't had a chance to read the article from that night where Skip managed his final game due to a death in the family, he is someone that I've never heard a player speak so highly of any individual, much less their manager, in my 3 years of doing this. Jake Berger, one of the great guys in that clubhouse, and you're right, Kevin. That couple months stretch where he was just trying to do way too much, he was really struggling, and I was worried, like, oh shit, what have they done? But he came out Mr. Consistent, hit 250 again, hit 30 home runs, 29, and he drove in 76 runs, I want to say. So yeah, overall, another fantastic year for Jake Berger, and you can pretty much count on him to be playing first base DH for you next year. And I can't believe we're talking about all this positivity, and no one has mentioned Jonah Bride.
I was going to bring him up next. Yeah,
my goodness, what a guy! What a find by Peter Bendix. 71 games played. The man does not strike out. The man walks at 11% of the time. He had a WRC plus of 123 every single time he stepped to the plate, which most of the time it was hitting fourth or fifth, sometimes third. Just what a pleasant surprise Jonah Bride has been. Really humble individual who's really excited about which he thinks he's earned a spot for next year. So he's really excited about spring training with the Marlins in 2025. I spoke with him a couple times in Toronto this last regular season series, and he has really quickly become one of those clubhouse favorites as well. And he's someone that if he can get to double-digit home runs, all of a sudden he's a really valuable bat, in my opinion. He can be someone that hits fifth, sixth on a good team. And I think the one thing he's going to have to work on is playing first base. He mentioned that to me immediately. He's going to have to go home, learn how to play first base, learn how to pick baseballs. But, if he can play adequate first base, DH half the time, I think Miami's got a really solid platoon bat who can start 3 to 4 times a week and be really awesome off the bench. So I think he is one of the real big highlights of this 2024 season that severely lacked them.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is just going to be how do they handle. Well, I find it harder that he's going to continue that consistency. I mean, every player, at some point will fall off a little bit, and the underlying numbers when they did acquire him certainly said that he was getting a little bit unlucky. But I think it could be a nice, bench bat, and because I honestly just think they're going to value someone like a Davison De Los Santos a little more than a Jonah Bride down the road. They're going to want to see more of De Los Santos and what he's done, and we'll talk about him in a bit. But we need to talk about Con Norby, who came in that Trevor Rogers trade along with Kyle Stowers, and he came right out of the scene and he looked great. I don't think there's another way to put it. He ended the season with a 760 OPS plus, 104 OPS plus, a 760 OPS. He had 9 home runs. I mean, he looked good. There's no other way to put it. I know there's still some strikeout concerns. The exit velos are a little bit low. I mean, you could even make the case that he was a little bit lucky playing out. He was outperforming the underlying metrics. Crutchik, talk a little bit about Connor Norby and, how excited are you to see him now in 2025 after getting this glimpse of him? Will he stick at third? Do you think maybe going to left field helps him out a little bit more? I mean, there's different ways you could go about this with someone like Norby.
Yeah, the first thing was it was very refreshing to see a highly coveted prospect for the Marlins, even though he was only here for 2 or 3 weeks at the time, but highly coveted, come up and immediately perform well at the plate. That was huge. You can also tell a lot by the way that a manager speaks about him. Again, not to bring up Skip again, but the way that Skip spoke about him was very glowing. Anytime he spoke about him, he goes about the game the right way. He goes about his preparation the right way. As for third base, it wasn't good enough this year, but he knows that. And I think what's good is, as opposed to, say, Xavier Edwards, who straight up doesn't have the arm strength for it and will need to work on that this offseason, Connor Norby has the arm strength. He doesn't have the arm accuracy. I don't know which one is easier to work on, but like he's got it in him. But he fields his position very well, just like Xavier Edwards. Like they both field their position very well. It's just he's got to work on his throwing accuracy. And yeah, he could move back into the outfield, but when was the last time the Marlins? I mean, they have Jake Berger, but I would just love to see them have another third baseman, full-time third baseman, that they could put there who also hits well.
Yeah, I mean, before Berger, it was Gene Segura. They've had the Prados. They've had, and then way before that, you have a certain Hall of Famer. But I'm with you, Krutchik, regarding which one is easier to solve. I'm not sure, but I do know that Xavier Edwards, he is well aware of his throwing deficiencies, and he's going to start a throwing program. Actually, you hear this about pitchers, but the Marlins starting shortstop for next year. Make no mistake about it. He's going to be going through a throwing program during the offseason to try and work on that arm strength, maybe some accuracy as well. And I think the main thing he needs to work on, I think we can all agree, is just getting the ball out of his glove and throwing the freaking baseball right away. He just does not know how to gauge base runner speed at all. You can have Bobby Wood Jr. running down first base and he's double clutching 3 times. It's not going to work. And that's something that's fixable. I spoke about that with Peter Bendix on Friday. I said that he just can't. He doesn't get rid of the ball. And yep, Isaac, you're right. And that is something that is very fixable. So I'm confident. I hope to be confident that this team really can fix its defensive woes because, hey, if you have 2 guys on the left side of the infield that cannot throw and you have a guy at first base who cannot pick, that is not a recipe for success.
Exactly. And if Xavier Edwards fields his position so well that if he could just have average arm strength, he's either elite or near elite at shortstop.
The other guy I wanted to quickly know, which I'm looking at the second half stats, and Jesus Christ, he was actually really good, is Nick Fortes, who had an OPS. He had a 737 OPS in the second half of the season. He hit 290 with a 326 on base. It was impressive. I'm not gonna lie to you. I mean, I honestly, after that first half where he had a 466 OPS, you would think that it wouldn't be much better in the second half, but Isaac, what was working for this guy? And I think he's kind of cemented himself as the opening day catcher as well.
Yeah, he just doesn't strike out. He doesn't strike out. His issue last year was just popping the ball straight in the air, right? And I think that continued early on this season. But like you said, that second half, he was putting together better at bats. He seemed to really improve defensively as well. But the offense, I did not expect it. Like I want to get this stat correct because the extra base hit difference, maybe you have it in front of you, Kevin, between the first half and the second half, all of a sudden he was starting to hit for extra bases, hitting the ball a little bit over what did he finish with? 3-4 home runs? I think 3 of them must have happened in the second half.
He finished the year with 4 home runs.
Right.
2 of them were in the second half, yeah.
So this guy, it's an interesting one. About 2 months ago, month and a half ago, I had heard that there's a very low likelihood that he would be on the Marlins next year. This certainly, I think, has changed minds of a few people. I know I spoke with some people in the organization, and they said that they were really, really impressed with his second half. And obviously, these people aren't stupid. You look at the bigger picture, and you look at what he did all season long. At the end of the day, it's slightly below average catching and really below average offense. So unless they think that this second half is something that's sustainable, I wouldn't move forward. But yeah, Nick Fortes, I think with this second half, as you can see, at 466 OPS in the first half, 737 OPS in the second half. So I think with that, he's earned himself at least to be Miami's backup next year. We'll see if Peter Bendix adds another one on the starting catcher or someone behind Fortes. But it's safe to say that Johnny Pereda and Aldi Sanchez are not the answers.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get into really quickly because obviously Pereda won't be back. No offense to him, just didn't work out. Same thing goes with Ali Sanchez. Krutchik, when you look at the backup position, there's some guys in the minor leagues that definitely could take that over. I mean, you have an Agustin Ramirez who was pretty damn good in AAA, but defensively still a lot to work on. Then you have a Will Banfield who's been there for a very long time. Joe Mack was recently named minor league player of the year. Don't think he'll make the roster, but should be a guy who gets his opportunity pretty soon. I think it's too early to talk free agents. Do you just see any of those internal guys potentially taking over that backup spot and splitting the reps with the Nick Fortes?
So I'll start by saying I do think that the Marlins will give Augustin Ramirez a chance to be a catcher. Whether that's in the major leagues on opening day next year remains to be seen. I do think Ramirez will come up, though, and be a catcher at least for a little bit. I don't know. I like you said, it's very early for free agency talk. So if I'm being honest, I haven't even looked at the free agents that are available this year for
That's
catchers.
why I said it was too early. Yeah.
But he has done great offensively, but defensively, it's obvious. Like, it jumps off the screen how poorly he's done at times behind the dish. It's not even one of those things where it's small and you got to really look for it. Like, it's really popped out at you. So unless we see a lot of improvement over the offseason through the spring, I think the Marlins would do best, just for now, to look for a stopgap at the catcher position, whether it's as a backup behind Nick Fortes until Ramirez is ready, or even starting in front of Fortes if you can get a better catcher.
Yeah, the Marlins are very excited about these two guys, in Mack and Ramirez. There is concern internally with Ramirez. I've heard that now a couple of times from pretty high up people, but there certainly is concern. They are going to sign someone to be with Nick Fortes, because I was told that neither of those two, especially obviously Mack, but Ramirez will not crack opening day, crack spring training with the Marlins, unfortunately, unless he really, really shows out, which I still don't think he would make the team. But yeah, I think it would behoove the Marlins to acquire someone. If you just really quickly glimpse at the free agent class and catchers: Elias Diaz, Gary Sanchez, former Marlin, Austin Barnes, Jan Gomes, Travis d'Arnaud, Danny Jansen, guys like that. Maybe an Andrew Knizer, Austin Nola, another.
They had interest in him last year too.
Austin Hedges, defense specialist. There's a few guys that they could bring in on minor league deals and NRIs. So I think that Miami will be somewhat active when it comes to catches, because, like I said, there's no Stallings. There's no one else besides Nick Fortes right now. And those two guys that we mentioned, they're at least half a season away. I think they're at least 2 or 3 months away, regular season time anyway. So I think they're going to –
Sorry, Isaac. Gary Sanchez would be an interesting one, because that's a comparison that I've heard from people outside of the organization with Ramirez.
Yeah, me too.
Yep. I'm going to give you your flowers, Isaac. Jesus Sanchez looked really good in the second half of the season. I let you talk all you want about him just now. He had a 745 OPS, still struggling against left-handed hitting. But one thing that did resonate with me, which Skip noted many times, is that he really, at this point in his career, maybe just it isn't for him, the left-handed hitting. Maybe at this point, what is best for him is just to hit righties, and he could be a solid guy doing that. I mean, you see a Jock Peterson, for example, who struggles against lefties. He's really good against righties, and he's made a career out of that. He's made a decent amount of money out of it, too. And Jesus Sanchez, the second half of the season, was really freaking good. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying it for a couple of years now. He's probably got the most offensive upside of anyone in this organization. That's when Jazz Chisholm was on this team. That's with Berger on this team. I think Jesus Sanchez has as much upside as anyone. I think he's done hitting lefties. I cannot see them continuing to put him in the lineup against solid left-handed pitchers. I think I would put the over-under at maybe 25 at-bats next year that he gets against left-handed pitching, because it's just demoralizing for him. I think it also subconsciously affects his at-bats against righties. He tries to do too much when he does get those opportunities against righties, but just the difference. He had a 485 OPS against left-handed pitching. He got on base at 228. It's just you can't let him do that anymore, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's something else I spoke about with some people, that if he's just going to be an 800 OPS guy against right-handed pitchers only, that's more than fine. He is, in my opinion. I'm not sure what the numbers say, but he's an above-average defensive right fielder. He's got a cannon of an arm. Sometimes he makes a lot of mental blunders. We've seen that on the bases. We've seen it on the field. We've seen it at the plate sometimes. There are a few stories that maybe we'll get into in a future episode, maybe top 5 embarrassing moments of the Marlins or Jesus Sanchez's career. But
there's a lot of them.
He's extremely special. He's a really talented hitter. And I did ask Bendix this, that when he was with Tampa and when Sanchez was a Tampa Bay prospect, how has he improved versus what he thought he would be? Like, oh my God, it's not even close. Like, he did not think that Sanchez would be this good. And I didn't either when he was a Marlins prospect in 2019. It was a win-win trade. when Miami acquired him. And just I can't say enough about this player. He's a really, really nice kid that hits 480-foot home runs. I think he is someone that if he just faces right-handed pitching, like you said, Kevin, there is a lot of value in a Jock Peterson type player. And you see the Marlins go in this Peter Bendix direction, Tampa Bay direction. I'm going to see a lot of righty on lefty action here. I'm not going to see a lot of Sanchez facing left-hander. I don't think we'll ever see him face a left-hander again because
I hope not. Yeah, I mean, it obviously didn't work. He had some success, but really just wasn't good at all. But
no success. He was god awful. He had a 35 OPS plus against left-handed pitching.
He wasn't great. He went overall for his career. He went, 17 for 115 against lefties. So wasn't great. But all right, last two names we'll quickly run through because I do think these are two guys who at least I'll be following a decent amount throughout the offseason as well as spring training are Griffin Conine and Kyle Stowers. These are two guys who I think are falling in that same boat as will they make the roster? Because I think those are two guys who are kind of in a position battle right now. Griffin Conine came right out of the scene, and honestly, I'm not going to lie to you. I was not expecting him to do what he did at all at the major league level. I was expecting close to a 40% strikeout rate, was expecting a lot of struggles, but he proved me wrong. And I know Arm Layton probably watching this. He proved us all wrong. So, Krutchik, talk to us a little bit about Griffin Conine, what you noticed. He has a cannon of an arm. He's a great athlete. Defensively, I think he could pretty much work out at either corner spot. And he's a guy who's really going to make a push for a spot on the 26-man roster come 2025, I think.
Yeah, the strikeouts followed him, but he made up for it because when he wasn't striking out, like he was a very, very good hitter. Like let me pull up the stats right here. Like I wasn't expecting him to hit 3 home runs in 30 games. I didn't think that he would reach 3. Like I didn't even think that he was going to play the full 30. He really impressed me a lot. OPS of 777. I think that's above slightly above league average, if not just average. Even with all the strikeouts, he was hitting 268. He looked really good. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys. Like I don't watch the minor leagues as much as you guys. His arm, I didn't know that he had that arm. I didn't know that he had that arm. I didn't know that he had. I knew that he was good on defense. I didn't know he was that good on defense. That itself is going to go a long way in making sure that he's on the opening day roster. I've really liked what I've seen from him so far.
Yeah,
and then the other – go ahead, Isaac.
We can't let September performances fool us, but this, like Kevin said, like Krutchik has said, I did not think – at first I thought it was just a courtesy call-up. His name is Mr. Marlin. His father is Mr. Marlin. I thought this was just a nice opportunity for him to play in Coors Field, maybe connect on one, but he has taken at-bats away from Kyle Stowers. He has objectively been more impressive in every facet of the game than Kyle Stowers has, and I don't think that's something that the Marlins saw. He has certainly opened a lot of Marlins higher-ups guys' eyes, and you absolutely nailed it. He will certainly be in the running. It's something that I can't believe I'm saying, that he's going to be in the running for an opening day roster spot come 2025. He's just not looking overmatched whatsoever. I mean, there are times where he's facing a really tough guy, and to add on top of that, he's getting hosed on some calls by these umpires. It seems like with just him specifically, not just him, but he's gotten hosed a few times now on strike 3.
I'll never forget the Paul Skeens one. That was insane.
As if Paul Skeens needs any help, he's gotten some tough calls against him. Maybe it's just rookie because he's a rookie. Who knows? But Griffin Conine, I think he finished with an 800 OPS in his 30 major league games or something like that. It's
777. Do you think his dad might have said something bad to these umpires like 25 years ago, and the umpires are getting their revenge 25 years later? Like,
yeah, your dad said something to me. I'm gonna use it on you though.
Yeah, your dad was an asshole. You strike 3. Go back to the bench, kid. But no, all seriousness, it's really awesome to see this guy perform well because I did not have high expectations, and there's nothing I love more than being wrong.
And then obviously the last guy to mention really quickly is Kyle Stowers, who is going to be in the running for this job at the end of the day. You would have thought maybe he would be a lock, but I really don't see it like that. And Krutchik, I'll go to you with this one first because we spoke to him towards our last day at the ballpark. We spoke to him just what you take away from that conversation with Kyle. Seems like he really does want to work on a lot of these stuff. And I felt like it was just a lot of a really bad approach overall. But then there were moments where he flashed the power, where he flashed, that he could be a pretty decent player. And defensively, there's still a lot to work on, in my opinion.
He's got the power. He's near the top of the leaderboards in hard hit percentage, barrel percentage, sweet spot, bat speed, all of that. I asked him straight up, you sometimes look like one of the best players in the exact way that I worded it was there's times where you are on and there's times where you are way off. And what is missing for you when you're off and what's working for you when you're really, really on? And he said, I just have to swing at strikes. Like he swings at these pitches that are outside of the zone. It's not a unique problem. Like lots of other guys have this issue. It's easier said than done, but he's got to work on plate discipline. Here, hold on. I just had the number in front of me. He chases 32% of the time. It's near the bottom of the league. He whiffs 36% of the time. It's even closer to the bottom of the league. And the whiffs are in part because of the fact that he's chasing. He's got a zone contact percentage in the 70s, which means that when he's swinging at stuff in the zone, he's making contact on them. And then, of course, when he chases, I have the number right here. Chase contact, the amount of contact that he makes on pitches outside of the zone, it's 44%. League average is 57%. So even by the standards of chasing pitches, he's worse than other guys that chase pitches. And he knows that. He knows that he just has to swing at strikes. It's an issue that I'm sure he'll work hard on during the offseason, during the spring. But I really like his makeup. I know that he's only one or two adjustments away from being a good hitter. I think he'll be fine. I think he just has to make those adjustments. The other thing, similar to Griffin Conine, I knew that Stowers was good on defense. I didn't realize he was that good on defense. Like he's a really fast guy. He covers a lot of ground. He's got a good arm. So that's another thing that's going to go well for him in the spring.
All righty. Anyone else you guys want to note before we wrap it up?
Nope. Just keep in mind this is year one for Peter Bendix. He's still getting to know everything in this organization from top to bottom. He's not going to have to learn many people that were old because I'm hearing right now that everyone, coaching staff, training staff, I get the exact quote I got. Training staff, strength staff, travel people, clubhouse, all major league staff no one's returning. So
why would you get rid of the clubhouse staff? What are the metrics there that he's looking at?
Yeah, they're not bringing up the water on time. I don't know.
That's for another episode. We might have an emergency pod if I'm able to get something in the next 24 hours or so. We might come right back on this mic and record some more. But I'm hearing a complete clean house.
Yeah, and I think with the amount of news that we should be getting at least in the next month or so, we should be able to go back to a bi-weekly more or less schedule. So as well with obviously the emergency pods. So we'll wrap it up here. I think we did a lot of house cleaning, at least in terms of wrapping up the season, talking about Skip, Peter, and that was episode 62 of Fish Unfiltered. So from Isaac, Krutchik, myself, and Eli behind the scenes, we'll see you guys all hopefully in 2 weeks, maybe a little bit before that if what Isaac says is true. And as always, go fish.